Today's heading is amphibians. We're going to talk amphibians. If I go too fast, you can always pause. Characteristics. Go ahead and write that. We're going to list some things. Amphibians are cold-blooded. You guys know what cold-blooded is, so you don't need to write that unless you really want to. But their temperature is going to change with their environment. If they're in a hot place, they're going to warm up. If they're in a cooler place, they're going to cool off. They are cold-blooded. I want you to write this down, torpor, underline it. This will happen. This will be asked on a test or quiz. Write that, and then write both of these also. Torpor, a state of dormancy during unfavorable weather. Amphibians are going to use torpor. Now, you're probably familiar with hibernation. There are many animals, whether it's mammals like bears, frogs and toads and snakes and all of those things, that are going to hibernate in the cold. Okay, right now we don't have any amphibians or reptiles out because it's cold. They can't survive in there because they're cold-blooded. In other places, animals are going to do the same thing when it's hot and dry, and this is called estivation. So when times become tough, like instead of right now it's too cold, well, instead of it being too cold, maybe it's insanely hot, and an amphibian can't live in that heat. It's going to kind of bury itself and wait until times get better. Or maybe a lot of places have a rainy season and a dry season. Well, during the dry season, amphibians will bury themselves and wait for the rain again. Right now, our frogs and toads, they buried themselves under dirt and they hibernated. Kind of a dumb story. When I was a kid, there was one summer, so I grew up on the farm, and we had this like junk pile. And I remember there was an old refrigerator there that no longer worked, and on our junk pile, and I filled it up with, it was laying down, and I filled it up with sand, and anytime I found a frog or a toad, I would put it in there, and I made like a little habitat. It was pretty cool. Put like a tree stump in there, and had the corner filled up with water, and I would put like a rotten apple or something in there, and it would attract flies for them to eat. Kind of a cool little habitat, especially when I'm like 10 years old. And did that all summer, and then one day it was maybe September, all my toads were gone. Couldn't find them. I thought maybe my brother let them go or something. Well, it turns out the weather was getting cooler, and they started burying themselves in the sand, and they were all buried. So I could dig them up with my hands if I wanted to. They were getting ready to hibernate. The conditions were getting too cold for them. So this can happen in really cold. It can happen in really hot. Torpor, that will show up on your test. Other characteristics, they do this thing called metamorphosis. Okay, and actually in this case it would be a complete metamorphosis. A tadpole, well, first of all, frogs are going to lay eggs. A female frog will lay eggs. When we do our dissection, hopefully we'll find some eggs in some of them, but they'll lay eggs. Male will come by, squirt sperm on them. They will be fertilized. Those eggs will hatch into little tadpoles that will swim around and breathe with their gills in water, and then they'll develop legs and eventually develop lungs and get outside of the water. I think it was this last summer I caught a tadpole in our creek, and it had back legs, already developed. And I kept it in a bucket. My wife told me I was dumb and it would die, but it did not. And I checked on it every day. And in about, I think it was about a 3-week span, it went from a tadpole with legs to a toad. Pretty cool. That's metamorphosis, a big change. Other characteristics, they have damp, smooth skin with no scales. Amphibians, usually most of them, have damp, smooth skin. Most of them, not all of them, can breathe through their skin, just like that earthworm that we talked about. They have to remain damp so oxygen and carbon dioxide can pass through their skin. So, throughout a frog's life, for instance, it will use gills when it's a tadpole. It will develop lungs for when it's an adult, and it also can breathe through its skin. So there's 3 ways throughout its life that it gets oxygen, which is kind of cool. They have webbed feet with no claws. And I'm using frogs and toads as an example a lot. There's other things like salamanders, which are kind of longer, but they're the same thing, amphibians. So yeah, I'd probably put this down. They can breathe through their gills, lungs, and skin. Oops. I think I messed that up. I would write this down. Eggs do not have shells. They're basically like fish eggs. So, kind of soft. And I mentioned this before, they lay eggs in the water and they do external fertilization. So the female frog or toad or whatever it might be will lay a bunch of eggs in a bunch of places. Male toads will come by, squirt sperm on them, and they will be fertilized. They lay tons, thousands and thousands and thousands of eggs. They don't expect all of those eggs to hatch into adults. Some of them are going to get eaten, some will get fertilized and eaten, some will hatch and get eaten, some won't get fertilized. Some of the tadpoles will get eaten. Okay, they're just hoping that 1 or 2 of them makes it to maturity. So they just throw tons of eggs out there hoping that a couple of them will make it. I would write this down. In order to live on land, amphibians had to. So the backstory here is basically amphibians, long time ago, millions of years ago, they were water, like basically fish. And then they developed certain traits to move outside of water onto land. So they evolved to live on land as well. They developed legs instead of fins, stronger bones and muscles. Write these down, by the way. If you live in water, you don't need big, strong bones and muscles, because the water is going to hold you. A whale, for instance, a whale's skeleton is not very big when you compare it to the rest of its body, because the water is going to help hold it up. If a whale lived on land, its skeleton would have to be much bigger, because it would be battling gravity all the time. So, in order to live on land, it had to have stronger bones and muscles. And it needed to develop lungs instead of gills. Once again, if I'm going too fast, please pause it. Evolution. The idea here scientifically, write this down, is that amphibians evolved after fish. Basically what happened was there was a lot of animals in the water, and they were all fighting for food and space, and the ones that could evolve to go onto land to get food and space were going to survive and reproduce. So they were all fighting for it, and the ones that could find other space on land survived. Amphibians were a dominant animal a long, long time ago. Examples, I'd probably write these down as well. Frogs have wet, smooth skin and a short, broad body. Toads have drier, bumpy skin with short, stocky legs. Most people just call everything that they see a frog. Most of the things around here, like if you see something in your lawn, it's probably a toad. Frogs are a little longer, have longer legs. They can hop farther. They're smoother. Salamanders, long, slender bodies, wet skin as well. So those are examples of amphibians. That is it for the notes.